Imagine this. You wake up and somewhere a missile could be in the air before your toast pops. Sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? For 13 mornings in October 1962, that nightmare was a heartbeat away from reality. One wrong move and the Northern Hemisphere could have become a nuclear wasteland. Today, we're walking through those agonizing days to see how close we came to lights out for civilization. It all began October 14, 1962, when a U-2 spy plane high above Cuba took a photo. That film landed on President Kennedy's desk, showing undeniable evidence of Soviet medium-range ballistic missiles just 90 miles from American shores. Flight time? 10 minutes. Kennedy's primal reaction was personal. He can't do that to me. He immediately gathered his inner circle, a group soon dubbed EXCOM, and the clock began its terrifying countdown. The EXCOM group met in absolute secrecy. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara suggested a surgical airstrike, while the Joint Chiefs of Staff pushed for a full-scale invasion. But every option risked nuclear retaliation, as intelligence estimated over 40 Soviet warheads were already on the island. Kennedy kept circling back to one question. How do we get those missiles out without starting World War III? On Tuesday, the tense discussions continued. After 12 grueling hours, Kennedy sided with a naval blockade. Publicly, they couldn't call it a blockade, as that's an act of war. So, it was cleverly rebranded as a quarantine. U.S. carriers and destroyers began strategic movements, but the president held back on an announcement, needing irrefutable proof to show the world. While the public remained unaware, EXCOM refined the quarantine line to 500 miles from Cuba, hoping to intercept ships before they could unload. The Navy estimated 40 Soviet vessels were heading for that line. The military alert level quietly shifted to DEFCON 3, and Strategic Air Command put bombers on airborne standby, each loaded with nuclear weapons. On Thursday, Kennedy met with Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, who claimed, with a straight face, that the Cuban buildup was purely defensive. Kennedy, knowing the truth from the U-2 photos, didn't reveal his hand. EXCOM quickly realized the Soviets might demand the removal of obsolete U.S. Jupiter missiles from Turkey in exchange, a trade that would look incredibly weak. On Friday, Admiral George Anderson delivered a grim briefing. Soviet ships would reach the quarantine line by Sunday. He laid out the chilling protocol. If a ship refused to halt, U.S. destroyers would fire warning shots, then shoot to disable. If a Soviet submarine escort fired back, Anderson's answer was stark. "We sink it, Mr. President." Saturday was decision day. Kennedy feigned a cold during a campaign trip to Chicago and raced back to Washington. He formally chose the quarantine option, setting his public address for Monday night. U.S. troops began staging for a potential invasion, while in Havana, Fidel Castro put the entire Cuban army on combat alert. On Sunday, Kennedy legally established the quarantine. The U.S. Navy deployed around Cuba like a noose. Panic buying emptied grocery shelves in Miami as fear gripped the population. Yet Soviet ships continued onward. The chilling escalation to DEFCON 2 was ordered, placing the world one step from nuclear war. On Monday night, millions of Americans watched as President Kennedy calmly but sternly revealed the missile photos and announced the naval quarantine. "We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the cost of worldwide nuclear war," he declared, "but neither will we shrink from that risk." A silent, deadly game of cat and mouse was now underway at sea. On Tuesday, the quarantine line became active. The destroyer USS Essex tracked the Soviet tanker Bucharest, which initially refused to stop, but then cautiously altered course. Kennedy, ever cautious, ordered no boarding yet. but pressure mounted as new photos revealed more launch sites becoming operational. On Wednesday morning, a ripple of elation went through the White House. Soviet cargo ships were turning back. But beneath the waves, the Soviet submarine B-59 was cornered. With U.S. depth charges exploding nearby and hellish conditions inside, the captain wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo. Only one man, second in command Vasily Arkhipov, refused, and his single courageous no saved the world. The showdown moved to the United Nations, where Ambassador Adlai Stevenson unveiled the U-2 photos. He challenged the Soviet envoy, Valerian Zorin, to deny the missiles existed. When Zorin stonewalled, Stevenson snapped, "I am prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over." The clip swung world opinion behind Washington. The diplomacy took a strange turn. A rambling private letter from Khrushchev arrived, offering to remove the missiles if the U.S. pledged not to invade Cuba. But soon after, a second, harsher public letter demanded the U.S. also withdraw its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. ExComm drafted a brilliant reply, publicly accepting the first letter's terms while ignoring the second. Kennedy secretly hand-delivered the response, adding a crucial private assurance. The Jupiters would be removed later if Moscow kept it secret. Known as Black Saturday, this was the most dangerous day. First, a U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, killing its pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson. Military advisors screamed for retaliation, but Kennedy resisted. Almost simultaneously, another U-2 accidentally strayed into Siberian airspace, scrambling Soviet jets. "If we're going to war," a White House note read, "it's going to happen today." The world held its breath. On Sunday morning, Moscow radio announced that Soviet missiles in Cuba would be dismantled and sent home. In Cuba, Fidel Castro was furious, feeling betrayed. For the rest of the world, it was a massive exhale as U.S. forces stood down from DEFCON 2. Kennedy kept his secret promise, and the Jupiter missiles quietly vanished from Turkey months later. If you're finding this story gripping, hit that subscribe button. In our next week, we're exploring why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed. Your support helps keep these deep dives coming. The Cuban Missile Crisis reshaped the nuclear age. Washington and Moscow installed the famous hotline for direct communication. The crisis also kick-started arms control talks, leading to the 1963 Test Ban Treaty. Khrushchev's prestige waned, and he was pushed from power within 2 years. For his part, Castro came to a bitter realization. Cuba had been a pawn on the superpower chessboard. 13 days, countless sleepless hours. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a stark reminder that diplomacy can work when patience outruns pride. It's a chilling lesson that nuclear war has no winners, only survivors, and only if we're lucky. Next time you hear talk of quick military solutions, remember those terrifying October nights when our planet balanced on one submarine officer's courageous vote.